to the note, but I also went to get my t-shirt, which I'll show you later. But Dave gave me some questionnaires that he said he'd sent out to people, they've sent back, and he's only just kind of got them this morning, about things that people wanted to talk about. So I've had a quick flick through those. I've heard what Sue was going to say. It's the first time I've heard what Sue was going to say. So I may adapt some of what I'm going to say. I might spend more time on some areas than others. But I thought that the most important thing, really, I saw the programme, I saw that Sue was going to talk about the changes, and I thought there's no point me coming and just talking again about the changes. I thought probably the most helpful thing is to think about how those changes impact on us in practice and how we remain practitioners really through this sea of change, because there's massive change going on at the moment, and it's about finding a sense of stability within that. So what I've done is put together a few slides with a few thoughts on how we retain a sense of stability as social workers through this difficult time. So I have put, I like to put this slide into my PowerPoints now, because I've spent ages doing that on a Welsh beach, and it took forever to do that. I was training in Wales and I went for a little walk at the end of the day, and I put this together. It took me ages to make it, so I like to use it as a photo. I didn't do it very well, obviously it's got my footprints all over the place. Could have done it nicer, but I think it's nice. But what was the most impressive was that afterwards, when I went and sat back on the rocks for a little bit, all these people walked up to have a look at what I was doing, and watching their response was the funniest part of the whole day, really, like looking at, what's that about, when they were walking the dogs. So I have been a social worker for a long time, more than 26 years, just over, more than half my life I've been a social worker, and if you cut me in half it would say social worker all the way through. I'm passionate about our profession. I'm passionate about the importance of our profession and the future of our profession. I've been a practice educator more than 23 years, worked with lots of students, some marvellous ones like Sue, and still I'm working as a practice educator, was in supervision with students yesterday, and for 8 years I was the Honorary Secretary of the International Federation of Social Workers covering the European region. And I say that to you because I think that's really important in the context of this week and where we're at. And quite a few of the questions on the questionnaire that Dave just gave to me was about what's going to be the impact of us leaving the EU. So I think I'll probably refer to that a little bit as well, if that's okay. So that's a bit about me and how I find my sense of stability, because social work is constantly changing. Social work is a profession about change, but I do think we've got more change than ever at the moment, I have to say that. But how I've always sort of thought about it is what I'm going to share with you. But I do think, unfortunately, there's a bit of an industry built up around change. And when I speak at conferences, I listen to lots of speakers, very often government speakers, who will say things like this. They will say things like, be the change you want to see in the world. They will misquote Gandhi. They will say stuff to you like, there's nothing permanent except change. There's no certainty except uncertainty. You get all of these things being said to you. Progress is impossible without change, and those who can't change their minds can't change anything. These are all things I've written down that government ministers are saying at conferences. And the one that got to me the most was this one: to improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often. That's a challenge for me. I don't think that that's true. I'm not really sure that Winston Churchill said it, but these are the things that I keep having quoted at me. So I do want you to think that, I don't want you to think that I'm going to talk about that and the importance of change and all of that. But what I'm going to say is, as a social worker, I've become pragmatic too. There's some things that are going to happen anyway, and so we're going to need to find how we work through that change. I'm not going to tell you change is the greatest thing, because I don't think it is, but I do think change can be helpful for service users. Making changes in their lives is very helpful to them. So I don't think change is a nasty word, but I think what's going on at the moment in this industry of change is problematic. So I want to talk about finding that sense of stability for you as social workers, for students and for service users. So this is what I use as my kind of my sense of stability, really, is the 3 key questions: what, why, how. They're essentially the 3 key questions that we ask as social workers every day. We go out to see a family, we're looking at what's happening for this person and this family, why has this situation come about, how can we intervene to bring about more positive outcomes. Essentially, they are the 3 questions that we ask. I think one of the problems of contemporary social work is that we are so busy, we sometimes miss the why. We go out, what's happening, how can I deal with it, what's happening, how can I deal with it, and that's the problem with procedural practice, is the why bit goes missing. So I think focusing in on those 3 questions helps me all of the time. It helps me if I'm planning work with a student, if I'm doing a learning plan, what do they need to learn, why do they need to learn that, and how am I going to help them to learn it? Works really well. I just last week completed what was a really difficult second opinion assessment on a student where there was fitness to practice issues, and again I used that and it worked to really good effect. I was looking at what had happened, why did it happen, how would this impact on service users, and how should it impact on her potential future career in social work. So it works really, really well as a framework, and that's what I want to use as a framework for us to think about how do we find a sense of self and a sense of stability. So I'm going to start with the what, and I'm going to ask you to do something rather than just me talking at you. I'm going to ask you to do something. You've all got a pen, piece of paper in front of you. I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds, really, not long, to think about how you would complete that sentence. Social work is ... How would you complete that sentence? It doesn't have to be a nice prose, it can just be a few bullet points, throw a few words down, do whatever you want to do. I love doing this with groups, and unfortunately I'm not going to get to see what you write down unless I'm nosy over your shoulders later. But I can sometimes tell where people are in their social work career by how they complete that sentence. I can tell how long they've been in. I can tell how close they are to the 7.7-year thing that keeps being reported to us. So I can tell really where people are at. But it's the thing that we do with students all of the time. Well, what's this all about? And I'm going to ask you that so that I can then talk to you about the changes and how you find a sense of stability within those changes. But as you think about and have written those few words, I'm going to show you a very short clip where a group of social workers from America were asked, how would you complete this sentence? And what I'd like you to do, as they share with you what they put, I'd like you to tick off if you've got any similar points. So I want to see how much similarity and how much difference there is effectively between your completion of the sentence and American workers.
Social work is hope. Social work is the future. Social work is advocacy. Social work is a holistic response to support humanity. Social work is justice for all.
Social work is the healthcare profession.
Social work is a nurse. Social work is voice reading rights.
Social work is discussion.
Social work is social justice. Social work is powerful. Social work is leadership in the community.
Hi, I'm Jim Foley, Vice of the National Association of Social Workers, wishing you a happy World Social Work Day.
I know you all celebrated World Social Work Day this year, didn't you? What did you do for World Social Work Day this year? Hopefully something exciting. You can plan ahead. You can plan now what you're going to do for World Social Work Day in 20 years' time if you want to. That's because we know it's always the third Tuesday in March, everywhere around the world except Ireland, where they have an official one because it's too close to St Patrick's Day to celebrate on the third Tuesday. And so they like to have a separate, I think they usually have it in October. So, I don't know what similarities you got there, what differences. Very often, there's the starting one and the final one don't get picked up when I ask UK social workers, how would you complete that sentence? It's very occasional that social workers in the UK say social work is about hope. And it's very occasional that social workers say that social work is about leadership in the community. But effectively, that is what social work is about. And at the moment, that's more important than ever for us to bring a sense of leadership in the community and for us to bring a sense of hope. So that's what I'm hoping we'll have as we go through this session. But you need to keep hold for yourself of what social work is, what it means to you. So that's why I wanted us to start there. And then I'm going to show you how our government would like to complete that sentence. So Sue introduced to us the Children and Social Work Bill that's going through at the moment. And I know that I know we are busy as social workers, but when bills go through Parliament and they're about social work, we don't pick up on it. We're not like the junior doctors who got ahead of the game and worked out what was coming. We seem to wait for it to come and then say, why have they done that? And actually what we need to do is, more than ever, we need every one of us to look at that Children and Social Work Bill and contribute. Write to your MP, get in touch with BASWA, say what you think about this bill, because this is going to be the biggest change for social work ever. And it's not yet set in stone. And we need to do something about that, and it relates to the European context as well, which I'll share with you later. But just to go back to another previous bill, the Health and Social Care Act is the one that moved us into HCPC, if you remember. So the Health and Social Care Act, when it was a bill, before it became an act, up until the 7th reading of the bill, this is how the government would have concluded that sentence. This was in a proposed Act of Parliament. Social work is what social workers do. Now, if we sit back and we don't look at the new bill, that's what we will become. We will simply become what we do. And that's the key issue that Sue was talking about the knowledge and skills and the PCF. The knowledge and skills is about what we do. The PCF is about who we are. And that's the most important thing to keep hold of. Don't let social work just become what we do. It's about our values and our ethics. Thankfully, it was challenged. BASWA got involved. International Federation of Social Workers also became involved in lobbying British government about that, and it was changed. Thankfully, annexed to the Health and Social Care Act was an acknowledgement of the International Federation of Social Workers' international definition of social work. And that is there. You will all be familiar with that, I'm sure. Need to be careful because a lot of books are still referring to the 2000 definition, because this is one that was agreed in July 2014. This says social work is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline. It promotes social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. Principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. Underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and indigenous knowledge, social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. There's a lot there. We could spend the whole of my 45 minutes or the whole of the day taking that to pieces, but I just want us to just go back to that. That's what we do. That's what social work is all about. It's a challenge at times, but that's what it's all about. What we've got now as practice educators is this, and I wanted to kind of refer to this to say I deliver training a lot for practice educators, and one of the things practice educators are struggling with, and I struggled with quite a lot, is that move over from us being competence-based in our assessments to us being capability-focused in our assessments. And I think I've got a hold of it now, and it is a big change. It's not just a shift in words, it's a whole culture shift within the social work education, and that's what we need to really keep a hold of, because this is what I think is under threat for social work education at the moment. The competence-based approach focused in on what students did, and if you've been around and been a practice educator using the National Occupational Standards, and I've been around as a practice educator even longer, so before that we had key roles. I remember all the units and everything. It's sad when you still have them in your mind, but that was all very focused on what we do, and the National Occupational Standards were very focused on what people did. It was about ticking boxes. Can you do a group? Can you do an assessment? Can you deal with a crisis? It was like that. Whereas the PCF is much more about why we do things and how we do things. So using that what, why, how framework, we need to look at what the student does, but it's important to look at why and how as well as what, and that's keeping that focus. I really like this and think it's a really good analogy. A guy called Lester, talking about higher education in the late 90s, said that a competence-based assessment is like giving someone a map and then assessing whether they get to the destination. But a capabilities approach is like saying, here's the destination, you find your own way, you make your own map. And that's what we should be doing, I think, as social work practitioners. We should be looking at, there's the destination we want to get to, but let's work with service users to find a map that works for them. Let's help students to find maps that work for them. So we need to be clear about destinations, but not about the map. And that's really the way to look at standards, I think, because that helps us to think about, okay, the standards are there, there'll always be standards, there'll be different standards, but see the standards as a destination, not as a map. Find your own map to get to the destination of the standards. I think now more than ever we are seeing students as map makers. So we are working, I can remember when I was first a practice educator, God, we used to write everything. We used to write the learning agreement, we used to write everything, we used to write pages of reports, like full dissertations on students. Now students are writing a lot more for themselves. So students I'm working with, they write their own learning agreement, they write self-evaluations. My reports are much briefer and much more about validating whether the student's done what they said. And I think that is about recognising the student as the map maker. If you look at the national documentation now for the assessed and supported year in employment, that sees the newly qualified worker as the map maker, that critically reflective log where the newly qualified worker kind of steps in along their journey at these 3 key review points and shares with you what their map has been so far. I think that's a good way of seeing it. And I think when you work with newly qualified, if you use that as an analogy for them, it works really well. So I like that, I think that can work well. But in terms of directing the journey, how do we find a direction to the journey at the moment when everything is so unclear? How do you make your own map when everything is so unclear? Okay, there's a destination, but there's loads of hurdles in the way, like Sue said. There's lots of boggy marshes, there's lots of things to get through. How do you find your own map? And I think that's where we need to use the frameworks that we've got. And Sue did them 3 circles inside of each other, which I thought was really interesting. So they're kind of encased. So you've got HCPC in the middle, and then that's encased by PCF, and that's encased by KSS. I see it differently visually, and I'm going to reflect a little later on why I see it differently and how the circles can work together. But I see it as social work, horizontal and vertical knowledge. And this is a theory. Horizontal and vertical knowledge is a theory, but Laming first talked about it in terms of social work. So it's dripping into social work. But the idea is that, it comes from IT, and I'm not I'm not great at information technology and computing and all of that, but it comes from IT, where apparently you're either an expert in hardware or software, and you're either one or the other, but you don't do both. That's where it comes from. And that's what we're being pushed towards in terms of what the government is looking for us to do. I think the government is trying to fragment social work so that we're getting so many different types of social work, so many different standards. So I think we need to look at this and look at the fragmentation. So I use horizontal and vertical to look at that. And I have to think which is which. That's the vertical, isn't it? The vertical is the stuff that goes upwards, and that's social work. In terms of knowledge, skills, that's the kind of knowledge and skills that all social workers share. Wherever you work, we all share certain knowledge and skills. We should all have a good level of understanding of human growth and development, for example. We should all understand oppression and how it operates and how we can seek to challenge oppression. We should all know about human rights and social justice, and we should all have good skills in communication. Everybody, wherever we work, shares that. Effectively, that's what we see in the professional capabilities framework. It's the stuff that all social workers have. Our values and ethics are tightly tied into there. That's the social work bit. But then your horizontal bit is the specialism. It's what sometimes when you read about social work skills, they talk about this one as being the generic social work skills and that one as being the specialist social work skills. I think that's a bit dangerous, actually, to see that as generic and that as specialist. And this is why. When we specialise, that horizontal stuff, that's the stuff that's different. So you go into children's services, a children's worker will have really good skills, or should have really good skills, in direct work with children, in eliciting wishes and feelings. They'll probably have skills in court work and safeguarding assessments and knowledge about the toxic trio and child development. But an adult social worker won't necessarily have that. But an adult social worker will understand what creates a capacitous decision, and will be able to look at the Mental Capacity Act, and they'll understand aspects around dementia and psychosocial models of dementia and the impact that dementia might have on people and so on. So we'll all have very different, that's the specialist stuff that we have. And that's important. But if we focus too much on that, I think that becomes generic. I think it becomes over generic, because then what makes us different, what makes a mental health social worker different to a CPN, if all we focus on is the specialist angle, is the mental health part, if we're not focusing on the social work part. So if you're doing a Think Ahead programme and all you're learning is the specialist bit, when the challenge comes, how do you go back to that vertical, that spine of social work? To me, that's what makes us stand up and stand out and be different to the other professional groups that we work with, and that's really important. So I think there's a value in the KSS. I think the knowledge and skills is important to say, look, if you want to be a social worker in this particular area, you're going to need to develop knowledge in this area and skills in this area. I think that's important. But the PCF is equally as important. And I personally don't think they should be cross-referenced. I don't think they should be all merged together. I think they should be seen separately, equally important, but separately. That's my view. I'm currently working with 2 students who are on a step-up programme. Sue talked to you about a little bit about the fast-track programmes. I'm just practice educator with 2 step-up students. I'm being told they're in an adults placement, learning disability placement, and I'm being told I have to assess them against a KSS for children's, and I'm refusing to do so. And I have been told that the DFE will come to meet with me because I will not do that, and I said, great, bring it on. I am not going to assess students in an adult placement setting who work with adults who are at risk of being infantilised on a daily basis and then infantilise them through my practice. I'm not going to do that. But that's what we're being told we have to do, because this is just a children's programme. That's what I'm being told. This is just a children's programme. Well, why put them in an adult placement then? Don't put them in an adult placement and tell me to assess them on a children's standard. So that's one of the challenges that we've got as practice educators, and that's the reason we need to see the 2 as separate but equally important. So that's important. What ties the 2 together is the why question. What ties the 2 together is critical reflection, because critical reflection is in the PCF. It's a key thing that social workers do, but it's also in the knowledge and skills statements, and it's what makes us different to our other professional colleagues. So the why question, I'm going to ask you to think about, you don't need to write this one down, but I'm going to ask you to think about how you complete that sentence. Why do you do this? Why are you a social worker? And I tell you why I'll ask you to think about that is because that is a really important part of your core. Knowing what social work is and why you are doing social work is the thing that will hold you tight through the challenges and the changes. And I tell you why it's really important to answer that question and be thoughtful about that and really put some thought into it, is because students every day in every placement setting, I will guarantee you that they will hear somebody say, this isn't why I became a social worker. I guarantee that phrase is used in every social work office across the UK on an almost daily basis. And it's usually when somebody's sitting at a computer, typing away like that, and then everything crashes and they've lost all their information or whatever. And then if someone says, well, that's not why I became a social worker, and I say to them, so why did you? They'll usually say something like, well, I wanted to work with people. I know why they're saying that. It's about the bureaucracies getting them down. There's too much bureaucracy, too much procedure. But that's not enough, because hairdressers work with people, taxi drivers work with people. Why social work? We need to be really clear about why we are in this profession. That's really important. We need to help students think through why they want to be a social worker, and it needs to be more than we want to help people. It needs to be really in there to enable us to remain a social worker over a long period of time. So you need to think about that, because it helps to avoid a potential cynical spiral. What we do, what social work is, and why we do it actually never changes. That doesn't change. I've been a social worker for 26 years. What I think social work is and why I do it doesn't change, hasn't changed. Where I do it, what forms I have to fill in, how I'm expected to do it, those things all change. But what and why doesn't. And so if you can hold on to the what and why, that helps you to find stability through the change and the challenge. That's really important. How long have I got? I'm a bit short.
Another 15 minutes.
That's okay. I'm just thinking, how do I have to whiz through this stuff? In terms of the how, so we've looked at what and why briefly. In terms of the how, I had thought about talking through these things, because I think one of the challenges with the knowledge and skills statement is it's focused on tasks. And I wanted to talk about how we need to think about softer skills. We need to think about things like empathy, which I think is falling off the agenda a little bit in terms of the knowledge and skills. We need to think about things like hopefulness, because that's really important. Emotional intelligence worries me, because we get told a lot, we've got to be more emotionally resilient and all of that, and actually that's then blaming an individual. But I'm thinking it might be useful to briefly talk about these, but as I'm thinking, maybe just talk a little bit about the international context, because I think that will be helpful to you. So I think I'm going to jump through these slides and talk more about the international context for a few minutes at the end. In terms of contemporary social work practice and supervision that people get, I think it's too focused on what a practitioner does. I think supervision focuses in on how many cases have you got, how many have you closed, how many new ones can you take on, what have you done, have you filled this form in. I think it's too what-based. I think a lot of contemporary social work is too what-based. And I know that good practice educators recognise behind the what is the why and the how, and that's what we should be focusing in more on. So this whole thing about what, why and how, contemporary stuff is forcing us much more towards the what, and that's why we need to question it and think about why and think about how. And critical reflection underpins all of that. One of the things I thought might be helpful to share with you, because I was kind of, what should I talk about, and I thought what works for me as a practice educator, what's worked for students, is in terms of critical reflection. The two areas that I write the most about and that I talk the most about are social work theory and critical reflection. One of the things about critical reflection that really concerns me, and I wrote about it in Baswell magazine, PSW, I think in February it was, is around the models of reflection that are being taught on social work training at the moment. And I read a lot of portfolios. I do a lot of the kind of national moderation of ASYE portfolios, that kind of thing. And when I read these portfolios, so many of them now are talking about models of reflection, but they nearly all talk about process-driven models. So you hear models like Gibbs, you hear Rolfe and Driscoll, you hear that what, so what, now what, that one, I bet loads of you have heard that phrase. There's too much what, so what, now what is all what. Where's the why? The why is being lost. Even in the contemporary push for reflective practice, because that's a big phrase of the moment, isn't it? All of that, if you look at where it's coming from, where the big industry around reflective practice is coming from, it's coming from health and it's coming from government. And we need to really question that. That's what critical reflection is all about. Question where it's coming from. Look outside of models that are coming from health and within the UK. Component models work better than process models. I do, with students, each supervision session, I use a different model of reflection to try and introduce to them that there are many different models of reflection and that different practitioners will find, you know, the model I like, you might not like, you might want a different model, but we should all use the model that works for us and our practice. And so I try and introduce lots of different models, and I can show you how I do that in a break or whatever, but I try and introduce lots of different models. The one that works really, really well is this component model. And so I thought I'll just share this with you because it might help some people. But this component model is a model from Europe. It's a Scandinavian model. Scandinavia has some of the best social work in the world, and that's unquestionable. You know, the outcomes, the evidence there is brilliant. And this is a model of reflection from Scandinavia. It's actually from education, it's not from social work, but it's from pedagogy, and pedagogy spans across education and social work. And Korthagen and Vassalos say, do you know, critical reflection is not just about thinking about an event, what went well, what didn't go well, and going through that cycle, because that's just a process. They say reflection is like an onion, and as you peel back the layers of the onion, the reflection gets deeper and more critical. And so they say the first layer to think about when we're critically reflecting, so you could now be thinking about a situation you're dealing with, or think about the children and social work. They'll have something in mind, whatever you want to have in mind, have something in mind, and think about this and how you would use this. The first layer, they say, that we should reflect on is the impact of the environment. And that doesn't just mean the immediate environment. You know, that doesn't just mean I might go away and think about how today's gone later using this. I wouldn't just think about the environment in terms of the room and the college and the building, which is beautiful. I wouldn't just think about that, but I'd think about the environment of social work. I'd think about the UK context within. So you think bigger. Every layer has multi-layers to it. Then you think about behaviour. Who did what? Who's doing what? How are people behaving? Think about who's doing what in the social work scene. Think about the chief social workers. Think about the government. Think about BASWA. Think about who is doing what. What should I be doing within all of that? Think about that. So it's as the layers go down. The third layer is to think about competence, which in terms of social work now in England is a dirty word, but we'd say capable instead, rather than competence. So with capabilities, but that's the bit about where do my skills lie? That's the what went well, what didn't go well part. What other skills do I need? What do I need to work on? What should I be developing? Who's competent? Who's capable? Then it goes further. And this further bit is the bit that's not there in the knowledge and skills statement. It's the values and ethics stuff. So the model goes further in reflection and says, think about your beliefs. For social work, I'd probably say values. Think about your values, the other people's values, whose values say what's going on within the room or wherever. Think about your identity. Think about who you are and what that says. I've been a social worker since my qualification is dated on my 22nd birthday. You can all tell how old I am now. It's dated on my 22nd birthday because in those days you had to be 22 to be qualified. So I actually qualified before, but my CQSW is dated on my 22nd birthday. When I was going in working in child protection at 22, families would say to me, get lost, you're a bit of a kid, what do you know, you haven't got kids yourself. They made assumptions about who I was because I was this young, and I looked very young as well. Now I go in to the same families or similar families and I get told, get lost, you old bag, what do you know you're at? So I'm the same person, but who you are and how you are seen is seen very differently. And I do think that social workers now are not as acutely aware of that as they should be, how we're seen. I watch students go into people's homes carrying handbags that cost more than that family have to live on for a month. And that really concerns me. And I think we need to be really putting a bit more time and a bit more emphasis into that whole identity issue and how we explore identity with people. That's really important. And then the middle bit, if an onion had a core, this would be the core, is the mission. That's the why do we do it? Why are we doing it? So on an individual basis, if you're just looking back at a home visit, the mission might be what were my goals for that piece of work and to what extent did I achieve it? But then on a bigger picture, it's why am I doing this? And I tell you, if you want to reflect with a student on something that they've done, on a direct observation you've done of them, you get this out, you will fill your supervision and it will be full of ripe, brilliant evidence for your report and it will help them find a map through. So try thinking about opening up. I don't know if that's a model of reflection that you've thought about or used before, but it's a good one. And it does work really well. This is another one that I would say is my top tip, and it's just very quick. I use this at the end of every supervision session I have with a student. We have concluded reflections, we call it at the end. you know, when supervision, it kind of peters out at the end. You know, you do that whole, when are we seeing each other next time, what's on the agenda, it just kind of peters out a little bit. We then have concluding reflections. We say, are we ready to go into concluding reflections now? And we do. And we have these 4 headings, and it's just like word association. So what surprises have you had since our last supervision? What's satisfied you most since our last supervision? What's dissatisfied you most since our last supervision? And what's been the key learning since our last supervision? So we just use those headings, and you can use them in any way you want. But what I find is, when I get to the end of a placement and I've got maybe 10 lots of supervision notes, I've got 10 of these things. It shows growth, it shows the journey the student's been on, and it gives brilliant evidence for writing the report. It's such a time saver. I can't tell you, it sounds dead simple, but it's probably the best thing that I've done in terms of plotting maps and journeys. So it's my top tip. If you want to try it, use it. The other thing that I've done quite a lot though is use this, and this is what was written in PSW. I'm not going to go into it with you, but this was a model of reflection devised initially by students that I was working with, and over time I've taken it on and developed it. And the idea is it's all about the weather. So you think about the sunshine moments are the what's going well. The rainy moments are the what's not going well. The stormy moments is all about the conflict and the change and all of that. You can have fog. What can't you see? What can't you get through? It works brilliantly with students. It's a really good one for reviewing the whole placement at the end. So you talk about the journey they've been on, and then you talk about what the weather was like on the journey, and you use all the weather. It works really well. It's a very good way of keying into critical reflection with people. Also works great with service users. But there's one bit that I thought, I'll share. The wind is all about the winds of change, isn't it? So I thought I'll just use this one bit of the weather. Thinking about what's blowing you off course, all of the changes that are going on. I asked you to think about why you do this job, why social work. Now think about what's blowing you off course, what's pushing you away from that, why you do what you do. And think about the wind and the challenge and the change. And that can be seen really negatively, and we can see it negatively. But this was a group of newly qualified workers that I worked with who used this phrase. I talk about getting a mantra, one of the things I do, and they used this mantra, and they said, look, when the roots are deep, there's no reason to fear the wind, so let's build deep roots and all of that. And they were talking about all that. It was great, it was lovely, it was all about the, it got in the industry of change stuff, didn't it? That one. But then they did a bit of research around it and found this, and I think it's brilliant. They found this. This is apparently, I don't know if that's a real picture of it, but there's apparently a big biodome somewhere in the Arizona desert that they've been building for many, many years, scientists have. Apparently it's somewhere that it's a bit like a big Eden centre. So it's like a big false environment that's all covered up. And the idea is if something terrible, catastrophic happens to us, people will go and live there, I suppose. That's the idea of it. And apparently everything works really well, except the trees. They kept having trees that grew to a certain height and then they fell over. And then they replant them, they grow to a certain height and they fall over. They couldn't work out what it was. The soil was great, they had sunshine, they had rain, they had all of those things. And they had these scientists spending hours and hours theorising about what it was. And eventually they came up with what it was the wind. There was no wind. And actually, whilst the wind can be dangerous because it can blow you over, actually the wind helps you grow deeper roots. For trees, having some wind helps them to grow deeper roots. So I suppose that's the visual thing to think about challenge and change and the winds is we need deep roots. We need the PCF, we need to be the social workers, we need to know why we're doing what we're doing to build those deep roots. But we also need some wind so that we can grow those roots deeper. This is my mantra, and this comes from the International Federation of Social Workers. It's from, I don't know where it's from, I can't attribute it, but I first heard it when I was at an international conference, and this guy gave a presentation, he was brilliant, he was an American speaker, very motivational, and he said, in social work this applies, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning how to dance in the rain. And I really liked it, thought it was nice, but I'll use that. But it applies more than ever now. I've had this as my mantra. That picture is actually the wallpaper of my laptop. I use it all the time. I've got a poster up in my office that has this written on it. When I'm having a bad time, everyone I know will say, oh, it's really raining. You know, we talk about those kinds of things a lot. I use it as an analogy a lot. But now, more than ever, we've got this really stormy weather going on in social work, lots of storm. But that's now extended with the EU referendum to the whole of the UK, really, isn't it? So there's a lot of storm going on, and the football and everything. It's all not great, is it, really, for us? Although Wales are still there, so that's good. But the whole social work storm is really problematic. If you just wait for the storm to go away, that will be you. That's what we'll end up like. That's what students will end up like. If we think to ourselves, it's what we do. It's what we do as social workers. Because we've got so much storm and so much difficulty and we're supporting change with service users, what we do is we think, I'll just keep my head down and get on with my job and it'll be all right. But actually, when you keep your head down and you get on with the job, the storm doesn't go away, it just gets worse. And all that happens is your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and your understanding becomes more and more limited, and you look like that, you drown out. So what we need to do is not hide under an umbrella from the rain, is we need to think about how we handle these challenges head on, how we look at those changes head on, what we do about it. Think about, I've been a BASWA member since I was a student, and I really believe in BASWA, and I think there's a great time for BASWA now, I think. But also, if you're a member of BASWA, you're then a member of the International Federation of Social Workers, and they are fighting for us. I think, you know, what's going on within Europe, and when I say Europe, it's not the EU, but within Europe, because some of Scandinavia are in Europe, in the EU, and some aren't, but they're still all in Europe. But the Council of Europe, which we will still be members of, is currently looking at having some kind of regulation and standards for social work across Europe, which look at having minimum numbers of social workers per head of population, as an example, which is really important for us, that look at having maximum amounts of time that social workers can spend in bureaucracy, which would be brilliant for us. So there's some really good stuff coming, and that's not going to be taken away from us because of the EU. It's the Council of Europe. We will still be members of Europe, even though we're out of the EU. So don't hide under the umbrella. Challenge all of what's going on, critically reflect on practice, think about it, and I'll show you now, just as we finish, my t-shirt that I ran out and got because of what you said. Got this t-shirt, it was given to me by some social work students and newly qualifieds in Croatia. And if we think it's bad here, having to do the ASYE, I always say this to students when they think, oh, I thought I was going to get qualified, now I've got to do the ASYE, and then there's CPD, and then there's this, and there's that. If you want to be a social worker in Croatia, it takes 9 years to qualify as a social worker in Croatia. You've got to be really committed. They have the licence to practice scheme. Some of what our government is trying to do is based on some of the Croatian models. So it's worth always opening up your eyes and looking at the international context, because you can learn so much from it. But this was given to me by a group of social workers in Croatia a long time ago now. But you'll tell when I put it on, it's not quite my colour, but also it's not the kind of thing you'd wear walking around Tesco's. Well, just see, I wouldn't, just see if you would. I like the t-shirt, but I wouldn't wear it around Tesco's or Aldi. It says, proud to be a social worker. But it has a little arrow to the face, almost like a smack here invitation. So I don't wear it when I go shopping. But I do carry it around with me when I go to conferences, and when Sue said, oh, you had to be a social worker, I thought I should put my t-shirt on, but it is. But if anybody wants to wear this, I have a photo taken.